requested, here is how I connected Zotero and Obsidian for the ultimate PhD workflow, especially because I am currently in the qualifying papers phase of the PhD and there is so much reading to keep track of and I just needed something to help. For those who don't know, Zotero and Obsidian are both completely free and open source software that are helpful for academics, but also anyone wanting to keep a lot of different sources and notes organized. I started with Zotero my senior year of undergrad, and that's where this workflow starts. Zotero is a bibliography software where you can store all of the meta information about a source, like its title, authors, translators, links, DOIs, and even a digital copy of the source if you have one. I pretty much always read from digital sources nowadays because I can annotate and highlight directly on the PDF and then export those annotations elsewhere, like Obsidian. The Zotero PDF reader has gotten so good in the past few years, and they recently added a dark mode too, where you have white text on a black background, and that has helped my eyes a lot. I also color code all of my highlights and annotations with a combination of the stoplight method and then some custom colors that I added. Red is for claims that the author makes that I disagree with, or am skeptical of, or know that has been debunked in some way by other studies. Yellow is for important or interesting claims made by the author, so these would be ideas that are important for their main thesis that I want to remember or include in a summary that I write later. Green is for claims that the author makes that I agree with and that are relevant to work that I am doing. So these are usually quotes I will directly include in my own work, and I tend to use green more conservatively. I think yellow is probably my most used color. Outside of the stoplight system, I use the color purple to highlight every single chapter or section heading because when I do export the annotations, it's helpful to have some kind of outline to keep the context around for different quotes and things. Blue is for claims that the author cites from other sources or claims that they make that I know connects to ideas I've read from another author. I pretty much always use blue highlights along with a comment, and you can actually add comments directly to highlights in Zotero. And that just reminds me, oh, this connects to this other author, or look up this source later. Pink is my confused color. Either I have no idea what the author is saying, or I have questions that haven't been answered that may come up later, and I want a reminder for in case it doesn't get answered and I need to look the answer up myself or come up with an answer myself. If there is an answer later, I comment or highlight that in pink as well, and then comment that it was my question from whatever page I first asked the question of. And then finally, orange is my definition color. Whenever an author defines anything important, I highlight it in orange, which is helpful for lit reviews because then I can look at how different authors are defining the same term. It's also helpful for just normal learning and making flashcards because I can easily scan and find the terms that I want to make flashcards for. Just a side note with flashcards, I use Anki, which is also free and open source for flashcards with automatic spaced repetition. So woo, that's my Zotero workflow in a nutshell. You can make folders or just have one big folder for all of your sources. You can also use tags to search for sources, whatever floats your boat. I do kind of a combination of both based on like classes I've taken or projects that I'm working on. And once I have read through a source, I export my annotations to Obsidian. I'm gonna be honest, I'm kind of new to Obsidian, but I do have a workflow going with it now that I like and will likely keep up with moving forward, and people asked, so here's what I do. Before diving into the actual setup on the Obsidian side, I just want to show you what it looks like when it's done. So say I want to import my annotations from Dan Sperber's book Explaining Culture. I set up a hotkey for this, which is Control-Shift-Z, and that will bring up a search bar from Zotero. From there, I pick the source, and then it'll open a new note with my annotations that looks like this. So you've got metadata at the top here, like the title, year, authors, and whatever tags I added in Zotero. And I try to keep these tags consistent across both platforms. I also have the link to the PDF in Zotero as a shortcut here, which is very handy. And then also links to the source notes of related sources, which would be from links that you add in Zotero. And this could be every source that this source cites, or just like specific ones you want to remember are somehow related to this source. And then I have two sections for notes below this meta information. The first is persistent notes. And these are notes that will stay the same no matter how many times you refresh the source or re-import annotations from Zotero. I like to put things like outlines here for longer notes or reminders of what I'm using the source for. And then under that are the highlights and comments from the Zotero Zotero Reader. If you change these in Zotero and want them to show up in Obsidian, you're gonna have to manually re-import them to update them in Obsidian, but it's the same process, which is easy, especially if you set up a keyboard shortcut. I also have links to the PDF pages that each annotation is from. So if I can't remember the context of a quote, I can click that link and it'll open it up in Zotero to that exact page. That alone has been so helpful. And you'll see that all my highlights are the same color as they are in the Zotero Reader. So by now you see that my Zotero and Obsidian aren't synced automatically, which I honestly prefer. So this is what it looks like for me at the end, and I'll show you how to make this happen in Obsidian. To sync Obsidian with Zotero, I use 3 specific plugins in Obsidian. These are the Zotero integration from MG Myers, Highlightr by Chitachi, and Templater by Silent Void. The Zotero integration requires you to also have the Better Bib Text for Zotero plugin installed in Zotero, so make sure you have that installed. You can download it from the Zotero plugin repository, which is zotero.org/support/plugins, and then Better Bib Text is under the word processor and writing integration heading under the LaTeX tech and text editors subheading. So you literally just download it and then drag it into the plugin manager in Zotero. Super easy. For setting up the Obsidian side, I want to thank 3 fabulous YouTubers for their videos on setting this up. Morgan EUA, which I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her handle, but her name is Morgan, and she's a fellow humanities PhD. Brian Jenks and Danny Talks Tech. So if you want to check out other people's workflows, I recommend those and I'll link those somewhere. Morgan doesn't do the sync thing that I do, but she has a lot of great videos on the Zettelkasten method and Obsidian specifically. I've learned a ton from her videos. Brian Jenks and Danny Talks Tech do more of like the syncing part that I'm going over in this video, which is a little bit of coding in a language that I just wasn't familiar with, so I relied heavily on their videos to get going. First, we'll start easy with just setting up the highlighters. The Highlightr plugin is great because you can set up your own custom highlight colors without having to find a theme that'll have you do CSS. You need this to make sure that your highlights are still highlighted when you bring annotations over from Zotero, and if you don't do this, it could cause errors in the annotations even coming over in the first place. When you go into the settings of the Highlightr plugin, make sure that you have colors named for all of the colors you'd be using in Zotero. The ones they have in Zotero are called magenta, so not pink, red, yellow, blue, green, purple, orange, and gray. And then you can customize the specific type of color you want for each of those. So if the built-in yellow color, for instance, is too harsh for your eyes, just delete that one and then make a new one called yellow, and then click on this colored circle and drag it till you find a good shade that you prefer. Or you can just put in a hex code if you know one that you prefer. You can just steal my hex codes too if you want, if you like the colors that I have. I have a blog post of this where you can copy and paste everything, so just go to the normal place for links. Yeah, with the highlighters done, now we have to do the more complicated setup for the Zotero integration plugin. So when you go to settings for this one, you're first going to need to pick a folder for where the annotations from each source are going to go in your Obsidian vault. I have a folder called source notes where those annotations will go, and there will be one note or like a markdown file per source. Then you can pick whatever citation formats you use. I mainly use Chicago 17th edition, which I guess I should update to the 18th edition now since that came out over the summer. The most important thing to set up for this plugin is the import format. This is going to tell Obsidian what parts of each Zotero source to bring over into Obsidian, and it does so using a template, which we'll get to in a minute. For now, you want the name to match the folder that you picked for where the annotations are gonna go. Again, mine is called source notes, and then the output path is going to be that folder name / site key into curly brackets .md. The site key in curly brackets is a variable that's going to be replaced by the Better Bib Text name for each source. And that name includes the last name of the first author, a short title, and the date. So it makes the source easily searchable in your vault. The image output path should be the same thing, but just without the .md. So when you select images of the PDF using that like block square tool in Zotero, the images are all going to be placed into a folder with the same name as the source note so that you can find it easily. And then finally, under the template file, this is going to be a link to the template we're about to make. You can use the same file structure as me if you want, or use your own, but just make sure that it matches the file name and folder it's stored in within your own vault. You don't really need to worry about the rest of the settings on this page, but OCR and image stuff is available if you want it. Moving on to the template itself, which was the most complicated part for me because it uses the Nunjucks language, which I have zero experience with, but using videos and templates from other people, I was able to piece together what I wanted. So first, you want to make sure that you have the Templater plugin installed and activated. There is no setup needed for this other than just make sure it's installed and active. Again, you're going to want your template to match the name and folder structure you put in the settings of the Zotero integration plugin. So mine is in my templates folder and it is called source notes. You'll see I have other templates in here, which I'll show you the atomic notes one in a little bit, but you can set up keyboard shortcuts to create a new note using any of these templates. But here is the Nunjucks version of the source note. So to get the metadata, you're gonna put that info between 2 lines of 3 hyphens and add whatever you want. Everything in double curly brackets is a variable that will be replaced by the correct info. I have title and then quotation mark and then in double curly brackets, title, type, escape. The regular text is just like saying this is the title and it's gonna show up as just the word title. But then what's in quotes and then the curly braces, I have the variable title. I also have the word escape here because you can run into issues with the template breaking if the title of the source has any quotation marks in it. So you need to escape it, which is what deals with those quotation marks, and then put quotes around that variable just to help with that. The other ones I haven't had issues with, so I didn't bother escaping them here, but that's just something to keep in mind that you can do if you're having troubles. So I've got the date formatted to just have the year because that's all I'm personally interested in, and then authors and tags like this. And you'll see that tags has to be enclosed in an if statement to make sure that we just grab all of them. Then I've got the Zotero PDF link, which is the variable PDF Zotero link, and then related also looks like this. Then my persistent notes are just enclosed in this if statement and says persist notes. I'm just gonna skip on to the most complicated part, which is the annotations. It basically runs a for loop for as long as there are any annotations in the PDF. So it's gonna run everything in this for loop for each annotation. And then within this, if the annotation type is annotated text, so that would be any of your highlights, then it'll grab the color and then write out that annotation using the class highlighter hyphen the variable annotation.color category, which is going to be the Zotero name for those colors. And that's what we set up in the Highlightr plugin. So that's where like the CSS part kind of comes in. And then it grabs and puts out the link for the specific page that the annotation is on here. Note that it always uses the PDF page and not the actual page. So when you're going in and putting in page numbers in your citations or whatever papers, just double check the actual page. Really easy to do because you can just click this link and double check that it's the right page. Then we end the if statement for highlights and then do the comments with the page numbers as well. I don't have the colors set up here because they don't matter as much for my comments, because if I'm responding to a red highlight, for instance, I can see the red highlight right above the comment. So I didn't bother with colors here, and it actually helps me to find my own comments easier when I'm scrolling down the source note page. Then we end that if statement, and then you can also tag comments and highlights in Zotero, so this last if statement grabs those tags as well. And I just let the images go in their own folder, which they do automatically from the Zotero integration plugin. I think there is a way to embed them in the source note itself, but I haven't figured that out yet, and I haven't felt a need to do that just yet because I just don't take that many pictures. I'll add that if I do figure it out later. Once that template is created and you have it correctly linked in the Zotero integration settings, you can go ahead and run the command Zotero integration source notes or whatever naming scheme you used, and it'll bring up that search bar for you and we'll start the import. If you want to set up a shortcut, then you go to your regular settings, hotkeys, and then Zotero integration source notes or whatever naming scheme, and then you can add a shortcut by hitting the plus button. You just want to make sure that your shortcut isn't already used for something else. Control Z is already undo, so I just did Control Shift Z because it wasn't taken up by anything yet. Now that we've gotten the Zotero integration set up and know how to import annotations from Zotero, this is where the rest of Obsidian comes into play. Obsidian's note-taking system is based off the idea of linking sources together, which is a big part of the Zettelkasten system. Morgan's YouTube channel has many good videos on this if you want to learn more. I like to think of it like making my own Wikipedia of everything I've ever read and learned and organize it by idea instead of source. This is very helpful for when you're a researcher because oftentimes you'll be writing many different papers and books on the same ideas and further developing dubbing them each time. So you want all of the sources ideas to be more free-floating rather than stuck in the bibliography of a single paper, where you'll then have to like go through every paper you've ever written to remember like, oh, didn't someone say something like this at some point? When the ideas are free-floating or atomic, to use the Zettelkasten term, you can come back to them, reference them, and develop them much easier. Not using a Zettelkasten system is like building a bunch of sandcastles that disappear once you're done with whatever paper or project you're working on. But having some kind of Zettelkasten system focused on ideas is more like building permanent architecture that you can come back to later on. To make this happen in Obsidian, I start by importing whatever source note I've just read, and then I create atomic notes from that source based on the ideas in the paper. Let's say I just read that book by Sperber explaining culture, so I want to take his definitions of culture and create an atomic note called culture that will have his definition of culture as well as any other definitions of culture I've come across in reading. Instead of just creating a new note right off the bat, I can search for a note called culture, and if it already exists, I can just add whatever quotes or ideas to it from the source note that I've been working with. And this is where my atomic note template comes in. So I don't have much in this template, but I just wanted it to be quicker to create. All I have is just the tags property, but again, you can add whatever meta information you want to it, like the date you created it, if you're journaling or doing daily notes, or really anything else. You can also like set up headings if you have a very structured way that you want to write the note, like having a summary section and then like a deeper dive section, and then like if you want to put all of the sources in one spot at the end, you can have headings for that in your template, whatever you want to do. And then I added a shortcut to create this type of atomic note that goes into my atomic notes folder just by pressing Alt-N. There are differing ideas about how long these atomic notes should be, and that's really up to your personal preference and what you think you'll be able to find when you search for it. Some say that you shouldn't write anything longer than a few sentences or what would fit on a physical note card if you hand wrote it. But for me, I like to think of it like a Wikipedia page where I'll full on write a literature review section for it, but I'll also make sure that larger concepts that should have their own pages but are part of this idea are linked to instead of being part of this atomic note, which is what Wikipedia does really well. So we're looking at the atomic note for culture, which I really don't have much on yet because I just haven't gotten around to it. But here's the Sperber account or definition of culture. Here is this idea under the umbrella of culture called the cultural unit, which deserves its own page and literature review sections. I made that page and linked to it here by putting double square brackets and then typing the name of that note to link the two together. If you need to change what shows up in the like actual text that's displayed, you can use the pipe character, which is usually above the enter key, to change what is displayed, but keep it linking to the same page. On this page, I have Schneider, Geertz, and Sperber all in conversation, and this is a first step toward part of a lit review that I'm currently working on. Once you've created a lot of notes and links, there is a helpful tool in Obsidian called the graph, which helps you visualize connections between notes that you may not be aware of are connected. And there are two views for the graph. The smaller and less overwhelming view is the local graph, which you get to from a note that you have open. So to open that graph, you click the three dots in the top right corner of the note, then go to Open Linked View, and then Open Local Graph, and you'll see the current note as a node in a network graph in the center of other nodes that are other notes that have been linked to the note you're in. It only goes one deep, so it'll only show notes that have a direct connection to the note that you have open. This can be super helpful to see immediate connections, but if you want to see larger scale connections between like two different clusters of ideas, you're gonna want to open a new page in Graph View, which is just the little connected node symbol in the left sidebar of the whole Obsidian window. As I said before, I'm still pretty new to Obsidian, so my graph is pretty small, but it already helped me see connections between larger scale ideas like musical semiotics and cultural transmission. If you want to see some really cool graphs, people often post photos of theirs and talk about their workflows in the Obsidian MD subreddit. One other tool in Obsidian that has been a game changer for me is the Canvas. In Obsidian, you can create a file type called Canvas that is, and I think, an infinite page where you can add text boxes and then connect them together in any configuration you want. You can use two-way arrows, one-way arrows, or just lines connecting ideas together. And this has been the final tool that has allowed me to turn my paper writing process completely digital. Before this, I was using the note card method with physical note cards that I would write an atomic note on, and then I would line them up on the floor. In hindsight, I probably could have stuck them to the wall and used yarn a la a conspiracy theorist, but that system worked for me better than anything else because it was so easy to move ideas around if I needed. And I'd reuse note cards for multiple projects, but it wasn't quite as organized or easy to find note cards as it is in Obsidian. And you can do this exact thing digitally in the Obsidian Canvas. What's even better is that you can directly embed any of your notes into the canvas, so an entire source note or an atomic note, even pictures in the canvas as movable boxes. So if you drew a figure or have graphs of your data that you're writing about, you can stick them in there as well. The canvas is also great for fiction writers here because you can put images of characters or scenes that you're writing about. All in all, this is one of the biggest reasons I turned to Obsidian in the last few months. I feel so much more organized and I get more of a bird's eye view of any project I'm working on that I can zoom in on to move things around. So that's the Obsidian part. One final part of my workflow is using Zotero to cite things in my papers in Microsoft Word. It's actually what got me started in Zotero in the first place because it keeps track of all of the inline citations that you use and automatically creates a works cited or bibliography using only those sources. And you can of course edit this later and add in other sources if you need. So let me show you. Let's say that I am writing a paper on Disney's Frozen. So I'm writing a sentence and citing this source and then another source and other sources using Chicago style. And then, okay, let's say the paper's done. Now I need to add those to my works cited, and all I have to do is click this button here and boom, these are all the sources I used in the paper, no more, no less. I am begging scholars to use some sort of source management system like this or like others like Mendeley. I work for Music Theory Online, which is a peer-reviewed journal where big dogs in the field of music theory publish their work. Every single paper that I have worked on has had the issue where the author has cited some source inline and did not include it in their works cited. So then that adds time and effort to go back and ask them, what source was this from? So then we can add it to the works cited list. Just have it in there already, please, I'm begging. It looks like Zotero automatically adds itself to Word nowadays when it's installed, but if you for some reason need to manually do it, there are instructions at zotero.org/support/word processor integration. And there's also support for Google Docs as well now, which is exciting. And you can find that information on the same web page. I think that's everything you need to use my workflow or create your own from this. If I've left anything out or you have any questions, just let me know. And I have a blog post on this where you can copy and paste everything from here. Happy writing!